Tim, just to yourself, in your opinion, based on the fact that you wrote the permeable paving and the tree root systems, how do you feel that that would compare that system that John's put in place?
That's a really good question. It's a really complicated, lengthy answer. I'll summarise it as quickly as I can. I don't know what the porosity of this system is. Angular quartz gravel is about 40%, give or take, void ratio. Your open graded asphalt can vary from about 12 to 20% void ratio out on the highway. I guess this might be similar to the low end of open graded asphalt, so 12%. So it's going to be less than gravel. In terms of water, that'll slow its infiltration a little bit, but you'll still get plenty. In terms of air, it won't slow it much at all. Air gets through everything. What we actually found, we studied diffusion, oxygen diffusion through soil as part of my study using permeable paving and gravel, and we found no difference in oxygen diffusion under impervious pavement on a compacted base or permeable on two different gravel bases because of the edge effects. Gravel being 40% porous, oxygen will diffuse through laterally and into the subsoil. Even with standard impermeable paving on a sand base, once that sand dries out, oxygen will diffuse through that incredibly quickly. And that's key to managing tree roots. It's the drying out and oxygen diffusion you really want. So this will probably work to manage the tree roots at depth. It'll still let water through. It'll still let oxygen. Water actually stops the oxygen more than anything. So good stuff. I
just wanted to ask a question to probably all of you, maybe starting with Joe. You're working with a developer. You're trying something innovative. As a consulting engineer, how do you get your client across the line trying something that pretty much they would have never seen or done before?
It's a good question. It helps to have good clients to start off with. Burke Urban are pretty well switched on to green engineering, so that was a big head start on its own right. So from day one they were focused on the green development, so and they're open to innovation. So look, that made our role all the more straightforward. So it helps to have a client that's already thinking green outcomes to start off with. After that, it's all about just making sure what you come up with is, give them a confidence about what you come up with is pretty robust in design and it's not going to fall over and, then they have to come back and rectify it afterwards. So that's really, really what the key is from my perspective. Great.
Just Tim, if you'll be happy to add from your perspective, you've had, I don't know how many years in local government and a legacy that Mitcham will have for years of all the projects that you've implemented. You obviously started somewhere, that first project. How did you go about getting them across the line in a local government context?
Before I get into that, can I just say to Joe, I know the butterflies he experiences when you build something like that and you get your first rain and you hope it stays where it should be. Because if no one's done it before, you don't know. So are you willing to take that risk? You always try to manage the risk. You think it through, you run a few different scenarios in your head, try and find a safe site. So if something does happen, it stays contained. Like the first soakage trench we did, if it was quite small, if there's a problem, just sandbag it, close it up. You've always got to have a plan B, and then just see how far you can push it. You saw the graph of the ground movement with the tree net inlets, and there's no difference between where we're putting water in and where we're not. That makes me ask the question, how much water can we put in before we start to see a difference? So we need to push it to find that limit. That's next stages of development. But how you get things across the line, it's not easy. Big corporations tend to become risk averse, and local government would have to be one of the scariest in that realm, because you can be spending lots of big dollars, community money, in full public view. You don't want it to go wrong. So how do you try something? You've got to have supportive people on board. Mitcham was incredibly fortunate at the very start that Adelaide Mount Lofty Rangers NRM board came on board and supported with some grant funding. But still, you've got to scale things down and start small. Really fortunate as well with a general manager like Howard Lacey, who said, this is amazing stuff, keep doing it. There's your parameters, there's your budget, go that way, do it. And he knew we tried to manage risk all the time. So you really need executive leadership on board. If you haven't got that, it's not going to happen. Should I confess, Glenn?
Well,
That's,
I'm going to say, gorilla keeps whizzing around in my head.
that's the very reason that I've started a job at, or will start a job at TreeNet as soon as I can get rid of Glenn. Been trying to move him out for years. Glenn's retiring December, I'm starting late November, so we've got a handover period. And a big attraction to that job is I'm no longer part of the local government system, a small cog trying to push. Part of that role is to get on the phone and the email to all the mayors and all the elected members of all the councils and regional governing boards all across the country and start to filter this stuff down from the top.
Great, thank you. I've got a question here from Ryan.
Following on from that, in terms of trying to encourage developers to uptake, what barriers can council remove or incentives can we offer? So when you as consulting engineers are trying to convince developers, what could we offer or remove to maybe get it over the line?
That's an interesting question. I don't really know how to answer that. You're right, there are a lot of barriers in place that make innovation a bit difficult at times. In the case of, if I draw on the examples that you've just seen today, it's all about engagement with the council and building a trust. From my perspective, it's as simple as that. Building a trust that you're developing an asset that is maintainable, has all the right measures in place to make sure it's maintainable, and is fairly robust in design. And look, I guess local government just encouraging some ideas to some of the consultants, because I don't think a lot of the consultants don't push themselves in this sort of area a bit more than they could. And look, at the end of the day, I actually don't think it's actually difficult to design these sort of systems. You just sort of really apply a whole lot of fundamentals all together and manage the risk, like as Tim said. There's no real hard and fast rule to go about it. Does anyone else want to add to that?
Many of us work in local government, state government. It's a 38-hour-a-week job. There's 168 hours in a week. You clock on, you're part of the machine. You perform as programmed by the machine. You knock off, you get home, you're human again, and you can have input to government. And you know how government works. You know squeaky wheels get oiled. Become the squeaky wheels. Community champions have driven a lot of stuff. Through TreeNet, the Tree Cities of the world, community champions. You can become them, you can identify them and work with them. You're only part of the machine for 20-odd% of the week.
I've got a question at the back, Craig.
Probably a question for Joe. I'm interested to understand, you mentioned treatment trains and it's not just an end-of-line system, and how that process worked with the urban designer doing the lot layout, between the road designers doing the road layout and the landscape architects designing the streetscapes. And you're saying, no, we need an extra swale here and an extra basin here, and I think if we can integrate this. How malleable, because I guess often the developer needs their yield, they need that many lots to get their money out of it. how malleable was the urban design process as these ideas were incubating, and this is our stormwater strategy, this is how it integrates with the open space strategy. How did that process operate out here?
Pretty simple, really. This whole land development was master planned from an early phase. It was master planned around Western Flat Creek. So, you know, a whole lot of studies and investigations went into the master planning process, and there were a few objectives set early on. And, you know, some of those were set from ourselves, WGA, you know, looking at highlighting some opportunities and just planning those out as part of the master planning process. So, you know, there was a big opportunity here to create a green biodiversity corridor around the creek line. So, you know, from a development perspective, they looked at the opportunity that brought about creating a community asset, a linear park, a linear reserve, biodiversity, greening, which was part of Burke Urban's mantra too. So, you know, all of that coming together was actually fairly easy. So, you know, we set some sites aside early on as part of the master planning process to plan these sites. Overall, on balance, you know, they meet their open space criteria. There's usable open space in some areas, and other areas, you know, occupied by these stormwater treatment systems. So it's really all just about master planning, coordinating, you know, different objectives from different members of the whole team. And the team, I also include Burke Urban as well. So it's just bringing that all together and coordinating to achieve common objectives. I don't think it's anything difficult. I mean, every developer approaches everything differently. You've got some other developers out there that are less amenable to losing, well, they perceive losing open space and lot yield to these sort of installations, but other developers might see it as an opportunity to create community amenity, but also showcase you know, green outcomes for the development. So in this situation, Burke Urban actually used this greening sort of approach that they have in the development as part of their marketing. So it's an advantage in that respect.
But it certainly sounds like the plan wasn't set out and then the stormwater wasn't retrofitted over, which is, you know, you started together. Yeah.
That's right. It was all planned together.
Yeah, Martin.
Okay, so the question was about, you know, what are the preset water quality targets that we're assigned to meet? And look, basically we're driven by EPA and water sensitive urban design targets. It's as simple as that. We all work to those targets on urban development. So, you know, it's just going through the process of designing the system, demonstrating it through calculations that it'll meet the appropriate sizing criteria and performance criteria to meet those water quality targets, as in addition to reducing peak flow as well, discharge.
I just wanted to ask Harsha, so you're working with the regional councils like Peri-Urban up in, looks like Light Regional Council? Yeah, and so I'm seeing them take on sort of approaches that maybe even some of their metro neighbours may or may not be doing. What was the driver for those councils when they came to you and said, we want this solution? Or how did that come about? Because it's great to see those sort of regional councils taking it on board as well.
So initially when I worked with them, that was wastewater sludge viability project during my internship, and that's where like I visited couple of times those sites, and I gave a couple of presentations on my research. This is what I'm doing. And a few councils, including the CEO of Legatus Group, he said, this is what exactly the regional council need. And we just focused on urban, and urban. So instead of that, I think if we really go in depth in the regional area, and they people are really very live far away from us, not able to come and join us. So I think their knowledge, so when they come to know about my project, and everybody, they showed interest. This is happening. We want to do that. So why not having a really collaborative projects with urban, regional, and so come together, have that research and have that project spirit together and work together. Because another project, I think when I started with the Goiter project, and that was on sediment, and we sent a lot of questionnaires to all the councils, and most of them, I think only I got answers from 2 councils that they have some monitored data, but others they said no, we don't know. They have all those systems, they got rain gardens, they got soils, they got everything, but where is the data? So I think to boost the policy, to push the policy, we need basic thing, that is research data. Based on that research data, we will start developing our policy, and then policy people will push these developers, and then community get the benefits out of that. And that's what I tried with the Legatus group, and they are really happy with that project. And again, on 4th, so we are meeting together, few other councils and mayors and CEOs are coming for that meeting. I will be presenting, and hopefully we'll get another good projects out of that.
Right.
Yep.
Okay. Got a question, David, at the back.
To Tim about treated inlets. I guess one of the challenges we have with our standards for Bringa Council is the expense of installing treated inlets per tree in a tree program. Have you done any work, or as mentioned, or Trina done any work around, I guess, the link between tree growth and canopy cover benefits that you've gained through that infiltration over a period versus not installing that system? So we can start to talk about those benefits and, I guess, fast tracking the canopy and health benefits of trees.
Yeah, so I think Tim will answer that because he knows a lot of stuff.
Question was, have we done any benefit cost analysis on the increased growth rate in response to tree net inlets versus no inlet to justify their rollout? The honest answer has to be it's early days. Investment in trees is relatively cheap. Return on investment, how do you calculate that? It depends what you include. A couple of papers were presented at the TreeNet Symposium just last September, just gone, looking at the return on investment in trees. And if you only count a few physical elements, reduced wind speed, reduced temperature, stormwater interception, those sorts of things, basic functions, it's many times, it's like 200, 300, 400% return on investment per annum over the life cycle of the tree. If you start to include health benefits like this is a state government report, infill options for tree planting and infill development for the planning codes just last year, 1% increase in tree canopy across Greater Adelaide from 20 to 21% canopy cover would reduce mental health presentations for depression and anxiety in Greater Adelaide by $8 million a year. If you start to include those benefits, particulate matter's been related to dementia. Reduced particulate, it's also related to spread of COVID. The virus gets on the particulates and spreads. If we can reduce particulate, we can reduce dementia. Trees filter particulates. So the figures on that one, I think, were by 2050, a reduction in 1% of particulates would save $700 odd million a year in dementia fees, payments, costs. So the returns are absolutely massive. Quantifying them is incredibly difficult, and at this stage, subjective. That's not a problem, but getting people to accept it is. I'll give an example. We buy 2 cars exactly the same, and someone looks after it. They're a rat bag, and it's trashed, and another person drives it sanely and maintains it. Same asset, completely different life cycles, completely different costs, but they're accepted and managed. We need that same sort of flexibility with trees. We're getting there. The Environment Institute, Professor Bob Hill at Adelaide Uni, is looking to expand that study that was done by the Attorney General's Department, for the Attorney General's Department. Independent consultant did it for them, looking to expand that for Greater Adelaide for trees as business as usual and trees enhanced greening. That should be a massive study.
The question was more germane about the use of WSUD and investing in WSUD for the purposes of tree irrigation or support, as opposed to not using a WSUD tree. And if you're saying that the value, the cost benefit of actually having a tree in the first place is, a huge multiplier, then the question is more about, well, what else do you incorporate to ensure the sustainability or the thrivability of that tree asset?
So we don't know what figures to count. We haven't quantified this as yet. Some of Harsh's work is beginning to, but the impact on growth rate of inlets is massive. Xanthia Gleeson at Flinders did some work over a couple of years. It's in press at the moment. It was presented at TreeNet a year ago. 50% greater increase in height and 25% greater increase in trunk growth of saplings with inlets versus without. But what that equates in dollar terms, we don't know the dollars. And what else we can do with it, there are the costs of road sweeping, berry production. Queensland Box drops the ball bearings because they're stressed. If they're not stressed because of increased water, they don't drop the ball bearings. They get twice as big in Sydney because of the rainfall, and they're not a problem. Here, they're half the size, they're struggling, and they're a problem. So we can offset the cost of that and the risk of that and all that liability. And the engineering around the trees, we can reduce those damage costs with the results you've seen. So absolutely massive benefit in dollar terms. We can't put the dollars on it yet.
On that matter of cost benefit, John, you obviously were faced with an issue of possibly having a easy discharge to Churchill Road or treating on site. Was the cost of potential future trunk main upgrades a factor in your decision to keep the water on site?
Yeah, definitely. So the cost to trench new pipework into the culvert on Churchill Road was going to be, I think we looked at maybe double of what we had done to keep it within the site. The soaker trench itself, to put rough figures to it, was about a 15 grand exercise to do as a switch up. So yeah, the costs definitely were outweighed to have it within that.
So it's a no-brainer, really?
Once we looked at both, it was a...
Okay, well, I think, do we have any more questions, or we wrap it up and head to drinks? All right, I think if you can all just put your hands together and thank our presenters for today. Really appreciate your time.